Well, it's time to be trimming off the dead tops of our asparagus ferns, but thanks to our recent 13-inch snow, it pretty much did the job for us. But remember, we usually leave our ferns on the plants all through the winter just to help insulate them a little bit more for the winter in case we should get some really drastically cold temperatures. But if you haven't trimmed them off yet, just go down to the ground level and cut off as many of the dead ferns as possible. And sometimes they're even easy just to pull out of the ground, but you don't want to damage the crowns if you can keep from it. So we usually trim them, and then we'll just rake back the ferns here. And of course, we let them dry out a little bit more in case they're too moist, and then we usually shred them up and then put them in the compost pile so it makes nice organic matter. But again, I'd encourage you to get those ferns off because it won't be too long till we start getting some spears popping through. But in the meantime, we're going to be renovating some beds, and I'll show you how to do that. Now, just like our strawberries, our asparagus bed is in full sun. We've raised the bed up and amended it with composted cow manure. And so we want good drainage, which is very, very important. Plus our pH is around 6 to 6.5. Now, on this side of the bed, our soil test told us it was a little bit more on the borderline of phosphorus and potassium, so we'll be incorporating that as we plant the hoe. But unlike strawberries, asparagus, you can actually start planting it a little bit earlier, say around January even, if the ground starts to thaw out, and you can plant it up until the end of March or February. But we received our crowns, which are usually how you plant asparagus, and it's best to plant 1-year-old crowns, which are a little bit smaller like this, or you can see our middle cultivar is about 1-year-old crowns, are much smaller than some of these even. But we received them several weeks ahead of time before we were able to plant. So what we did, we just kept these in a dry area, cool, around 40 degrees, and just stored them in a bucket or something, kept them dry again so they wouldn't mold or get too moist on us. And now we've brought them out to plant. And the very first thing that you want to do is just soak them in some water like I have here behind me. Not for a long period of time like grapes, but say for 5–10 minutes, just to kind of get some moisture in there before you stick them in the ground. Now, our raised bed is again about 3 feet wide, good drainage with the organic matter, and we're going to put our crowns pretty close together, anywhere from 12 to 15 inches. I think we finally decided on about 15 inches between the crowns. Now, probably one of the biggest mistakes in planting the crowns of asparagus is people not getting them deep enough. So I'm going to use a pair of post hole diggers, and I'm going to measure to know how deep this is. Generally, you'll read 4 to 6 inches for the planting depth. Now, that means above the crown itself. But I like to put them even a little bit deeper in some good organic material where they're drained well, which we've amended. So we're going to dig a hole here, and those are about 9 inches. We'll make it quite a bit bigger. We're going to put them right in the center. And you'll see that I'm not just making a little bit of a planting hoe. I'm getting it quite a bit wider, almost like you would plant a tree, so we can fan those roots out. And I'm going to even go a little bit deeper because remember, we're going to be putting in some fertilizer in the bottom of the planting hoe. Okay. And we're just going to put in just a little bit of a sprinkling right in the bottom of the planting hoe. And this is a triple 13. Now again, you don't want to go overboard, and we're saving a little bit of fertilizer by actually putting it here versus a whole planting bed. You could till it through the whole planting bed if you'd like. Now remember, you don't want direct contact with the fertilizer, so we're going to mix it in a little bit to start with, put a little bit more soil in there so there's no direct contact. And then here's a crown that we've already soaked. And a lot of people will kind of build up a dome in the center or a cone shape, so you can set that right over the top of that dome and it will spread the roots out for you. Now you could trim the roots a little bit if you wanted to, but again, the most important thing is to make sure, and that's about soil, that's going to be 8 inches above that crown, maybe 6 if we go a little bit more. So we'll cover that in, and the main thing is to try to get those roots spread out a little bit. A lot of people, again, want to plant them like we're used to planting other plants, where this is, even with the soil, again, you really need to get them much deeper. So we'll cover that up, and then we can shape our bed back a little bit in the meantime. But also, this obviously is for people who are, some tips for people who are planting asparagus the very first time. If you're planting asparagus and it gets too thick, now's a good time to, or even earlier, where you can spread it out, share some with your neighbors if you need to. So there's actually about 3 crowns here that have grown together that you could divide and share if you need to do that. Now usually that's not a process necessary unless you've had a bed in maybe 5-6 years and you need to divide them. But let me tell you a little bit about the cultivars that we're planting. Our traditional one that's behind us that I was trimming up is Mary Washington. You'll also hear about Martha Washington. Those are the standards. And one thing about those cultivars, you have male and female plants. Now, how do you know you have a female? Well, obviously it puts berries on. These are some of the ones left over from last year. We also know we have female plants because from time to time we find asparagus popping up in our other flower beds where the birds have dropped these in the flower beds and they germinate. Now those we could transplant. Obviously it takes longer for production versus a crown. But some of the newer improved varieties after that was a UC 157, and it comes in 2 hybrid versions, an F1 and F2, which means it's been improved. And that's what we have at the end of this bed. And then you'll also see some new ones that are out by Rutgers that are all male varieties, which means no seed pods or seed on them. And those are going to be names like Jersey Giant, Jersey Gem, Jersey Queen, Jersey Knight, Jersey King even, and we've got Jersey Knight that we're planting here on this end. But we also like to do some fun things, so we're planting a purple passion. There's also purple viola or viola, but it's going to be purple spears versus a traditional green. Now again, there's a wide selection of these. Check your garden centers, you'll be surprised. But we got ours from Stark Brothers because they also helped us out with some of our fruit trees, so we got some of our crowns. And then the purple passion is a little bit more unique, so we had to order it from the California Asparagus Seed and Transplant Company out of Davis, California. So again, we had to do a little bit of checking and mail order some of ours in that are a little bit more unique. Now with the all male hybrids, there's one thing you need to keep in mind. Traditionally, when we start harvesting the spears, we want to cut them about 9 inches. But we found in the hotter conditions in Oklahoma, and obviously if these have been developed in the Jersey area or Rutgers, it's cooler. So what we find is these particular ones will actually fern out earlier, so you need to cut them a little bit shorter. And ferning out just means they start to separate, make the tall ferns, and they're not as harvestable as far as their quality goes. So you have to watch to make sure you're harvesting at the right time before the head starts to loosen up. Now, just like our strawberries though, there's something that you need to keep in mind. We are planting 1-year-old crowns in here, some a little bit older, some 2 or 3. But this first year is nothing more than production to get these crowns bigger like this, because obviously the bigger the crown, the bigger your spear will be. So we're going to plant them, get our fertilizer in, and we're going to mulch again over the top with cottonseed hulls to keep the weeds out, also keep them watered. But we are not going to harvest any this year, none at all. It's all going to go to the fern growth to make a bigger crown. Then next year we'll harvest a little bit for about 3 to 4 weeks. The following year we'll extend that to about 6 or 7 weeks. And then come the 3rd year we'll harvest 8-9 weeks like we would our traditional crop. So it's very tempting to see a few spears come up, and obviously they're going to be smaller too. But leave them alone, let them all go to the nutrition of your crown for years of enjoyment, because it's a perennial crop. So you've still got a couple of weeks, check around and get those asparagus crowns in the ground.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.